All right, we are recording. You say committed. You say
now we're live.
Oh, now we're live. Just because I said you say committed.
You say committed, I say commoded.
Come on.
Show me a box and I will climb right out of
it. Not all boxes. You had an imagination as a kid.
True.
Yeah.
It didn't stay a box for long, though.
As boxes should.
What are we talking about exactly,
Well,
Kumar?
so last time was segregation. This time we're going to talk about my least favorite historical black leader.
Oh, man.
Yes, I qualified
I
him out the gates.
He does have redeeming qualities.
After the last episode, you said we don't always agree. I feel like this is one of those topics that there's not going to be agreement on.
Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Okay.
Do you have an opinion of Booker T. Washington?
No.
Okay, so you might agree with me.
I'll probably take the opposite of whatever you take.
You have no opinion of Booker T.
I do have an opinion.
Okay.
So I've read Up From Slavery.
Yeah.
I've read of some of his controversies, some of Kumar's perspective on that.
You've been berated many times by my view of him.
Yes, but I have not. I would not say that I have read widely enough.
Gotcha.
To consider it an informed opinion.
Yeah.
So this is the Booker T. Washington,
Yes.
the founder of Tuskegee Institute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And he is very much so a leader, a historical leader. And I will say my opinion of him is formed less from what he wrote and more from what he was trying to do.
Right.
Mine actually comes from a true philosophical disagreement with him. I disagree wholeheartedly with his philosophy on how to deal with the ethnic question that his generation faced and my generation still faces to a different degree. And that's where mine comes from. It's not that he was a bad human being. I think that from everything I've observed about him, he was an honorable man as far as how he lived his life. He was not a hypocrite. He was consistent. Right. He said what he believed and he believed it thoroughly.
Right.
All those things I say are true. In fact, I have no reason to doubt even him being a member of the body of Christ. All those things. Yeah. My issue with him and why I say least favorite has everything to do with his philosophy and what I view as the repercussions thereof.
Now, I tend to agree with you, but I think the only way that I can do that without blinking an eye is because of where we are in history now. I can look backwards and say he was wrong. And so I can Monday morning quarterback Booker T. Washington, but I don't know if I would be 100% in that same camp if I was in that day and time.
Yeah. Because
it sounded really, really good.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, let's go to page 118. We are going to do an extended reading here for a little bit because I think that what you were saying there, Richard, is a point. It's so easy for us to sit now and look back on history and say, you were dumb. And I think what would be better to do is say, was there a contemporary who looked across and not back and said, you're dumb?
Right. And there was.
Yeah. One of my most favorite historical black leaders. And so what you have here is one stop, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. I realize, like you say, Du Bois. This is a debatable thing. I lean towards the French pronunciation as I do with my own last name, which is why I say Richer and why I say Du Bois.
Du Bois.
So, but if you say Du Bois, whatever, it doesn't hurt my feelings. So it says, two distinct visions of the black future envisioned at the dawn of the 20th century turned on the answer to that question. So the question is, what is the question? Right? It's kind of like when we're expositing scripture, right? And we say, therefore, there is now. And we're like, well, wait,
what's the
therefore, huh?
Yeah.
Huh? And so the question is, what is this question they're facing, right? The question is, what should black people do in the face of this oppression, in the face of these, we talked about last time, these systems that are being constructed?
Right.
What should their response be? Should their response be, forget you people, I'm an equal, treat me like such, or answer? Or should your response be, well, we're going to find a way to navigate as best we can in a corrupt and fallen world and just make do? Right. That's really the question being faced is, should I respond by standing up, holding my ground, shoulders back, or should I respond by just giving in and making the best I can? In Washington.
Or is there a third way? Just saying.
Well,
because the question that Glazier's dealing with is, but was that possible?
Yeah.
Basically, could they make their way through their own agency? Was that possible amid a regime of social inequality that few black people were willing to challenge for fear of economic reprisal or the eruption of personal or collective violence?
Yeah.
And that way of stating, again, it's got a few more words maybe than necessary.
Yeah.
But is it possible for a black person in this context to improve, to grow, to improve their standing in society in the face of everything, all these pressures that were coming against them.
Do it by standing tall as opposed to by giving into the paternalistic leanings.
Yeah.
Well, you say a third option. I think that I feel anyways, it's fair to say that for black people in of themselves, there was no third option. I can see, you could say there's a third option of maybe white people responding differently or government responding. Like, I can see that there could be other options outside of an internal black response. But I think within Black America, there really were only those two choices. Was either we shut up and take it and try and make do, or we don't shut up and take it and we stand up.
Right.
And those are the only options available to them. You could say, well, you could leave the country. Well, as we established, that takes money.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily just leave the country. That's why Garvey wasn't successful, because it's like, how are you going to leave? Yeah. Well, you need money. Well, how are you going to get that money? Go back to options 1 and 2.
He did try to raise money though.
Yeah.
And he kind of failed with that.
So this was their question. So Booker T. Washington emphasized racial conciliation without overtly challenging the regime of racial hierarchy and social inequality embedded in segregation. That was Washington's approach. To quote the great poet Rodney King, can we all just get along?
Yeah.
That pretty much was his entire approach.
Yeah, basically there is systemic racism. Let's try to work within that system and do the best we can.
Yeah. Let's not fight about it. Let's not argue about it. Yeah. Let's just get along and we'll be all right.
Let's
and
give what they take us and try to do the best.
Yeah. And so it says here, going down, it says he emphasized accommodating black life to the social and political realities of race, an acceptance of white domination and black quiescence in the face of the denial of civil rights. That was a large part of how he did it. Was, like I said, I'm oversimplifying it, but largely a shut up and take it. And some people say, well, this is not what Martin Luther King Jr. did. No, because he did a shut up but don't take it.
Yeah.
More or less.
And that was actually the third way that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Instead of, just kind of kowtowing, I think the word was in the last one, and instead of kowtowing to the white overlords, kowtowing to the system, saying this is wrong, but we are going to work within the peaceful means at our disposal to express why it's wrong. Instead of a militant response, it is that third way of saying this is not right, but we're going to work within it to show you that it's not right.
Yeah. Well, I think that Jim Crow was still bad in the 50s and 60s. Right. But I think part of why King could have that option and they didn't back then was because of the level of violence. Essentially, for you to stand up, and even if you shut up but you didn't take it, that was violent.
Right.
That was considered in that time period in the early 1900s. That was violent resistance for a black person to not take it,
because you were going to go to jail
or die.
Yeah,
I mean that was
going to precipitate violence.
Yeah, well, but also that was perceived as violence on behalf of the black person.
Because it was threatening.
For a black person to stand up and not take it was threatening.
Yes,
so that was defined as violent black behavior back then. Wrongfully so. But that's something you can even see hints of that even today when people talk about police violence and things like that. Yeah. And they're trying to understand, why do people respond the way they do? Well, because, and we're gonna get into some of these other things in the next episode on lynching, but you still see shadows of that he didn't give in. It's like, dude, he was on the ground crying for his mom. Yeah, but he looked at me.
Any resistance could be considered threatening.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was the atmosphere. And so in that sense too, you could say, well, Washington, you're not wrong. In an atmosphere such as that, where to just stand up is considered violent, then, I mean, if you like breathing, it goes on to say support for black common schools and industrial training while directing black youth away from higher education. This was what he looked at. And even like the Tuskegee Institute, it's a university, it's a school, but it is not a school like the school I went to. I went to Prairie View A&M University. So you had black schools that were about, we're going to make doctors and lawyers and politicians. Yeah. Washington's like, no, we're going to make electricians and plumbers. We're going to make, maybe a nurse, but probably more like a nurse's aide.
Middle class.
We're gonna make these highly skilled, highly intelligent workers, but we don't want to go too far now. Because if we go too far, that's threatening. That's aggressive. That's violent. Let's just go a little bit and call it a day.
We don't want to get too uppity.
Yeah. And this is versus Du Bois, which offered a very different vision, it says. And then you have a quote from him. It says, "The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. He rejected Washington's program of black submission to white domination in favor of an assertive push for political power and civil rights, as well as a relentless challenge to the continuation of physically damaging acts of discrimination flowing from social inequality. He also advocated for higher education. So again, you can see, I'm very biased, obviously. Me with all my way too many degrees. It was obvious which way I was going to go. But even as a little kid, like, I mean, I remember my parents gave these to me. They said, read both these books.
Right.
These are the main views that we have as black Americans. As intelligent, intellectual black Americans, pretty much you're going to have to choose one of these two camps, Kamar. Which camp are you going to be in? My parents didn't make me choose, but I always resonated with Du Bois and his idea of the talented 10th, especially, and the idea that there are people who, if you have a lot of talents, if you have a lot of ability, if you can read really good and go to school is easy for you, it is your duty to society and your people to do everything you can to be the very best you can be at all times to move everybody up. Excellence is meant to bring everybody up, not for you to hide it for your own self-survival, but you go out there and you be as excellent as you can be for the sake of everybody's good.
And that's where we get the idea of the black elite.
Yeah.
They help to bring everybody up.
Yeah.
So the thing about, the average person probably doesn't know a big deal about the difference between Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, or Du Bois. But
You can say Du Bois, it's okay.
I like Du Bois. Okay.
Yeah, you're a Du Boiser.
So I'm a Du Boiser, the Boisiac. Okay, so, but the thing about it is why was there this debate between the two, and why was one favored over the other? And I think it's, maybe it's easy to conceive, but the idea is that because Booker T, he really didn't force the hand of white people as much as W.E.B. Du Bois did. And so because of that, there was a lot more support thrown at Booker T. I mean, he would sit with presidents. He would meet with, universities. He would meet, and he was a great fundraiser.
Yeah.
I mean, he would get money thrown at him. That's how he got his college started.
Yeah.
People would just give him money because he was that moderate who really wasn't pushing for too much. And in his thought, he was incrementally getting closer and closer to that elusive goal of equality. But he would do it in such a way as that it didn't push white people too far to anger them or to shake them. And so because of that, he solicited a lot of support.
Yeah.
I mean, white people loved Booker T. Washington. And because of his clout, because of his name recognition, he would get to speak in anywhere he wanted to speak. He could speak in the White House. He could speak in any university he wanted. And because of his reputation, he solicited a lot of support from black people in the U.S.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of people that were more for him than for W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yeah. And so why we're talking about this, why he's in this book, is because an interesting part of history of Hopkinsville is Washington came to Hoptown.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be a movie right there, right?
Washington came. Mr. Washington comes to Hoptown.
But he did. He came because Hopkinsville was an actual rather influential and important part of Black America. Yeah. Something that, again, that I didn't realize till I lived here.
He went to Guthrie first. And then
but I mean, this was a huge, important, because you had such a huge large black population in what was a decent sized city until Clarksville grew, essentially. Right. It was important. This was a place worth stopping in.
Right.
And so in 1909, he came through here. And that's why he's in the book. And that's why we're going to talk more about him, because Du Bois didn't come through here.
Maybe he should have.
Maybe he should have. Maybe if he had, things would be different here.
Maybe.
I mean, because I think that it's obvious.
What if?
Well, no, it's not. To me, it's obvious that the black people of Hopkinsville didn't just listen to him when he came to town. I feel like they really absorbed his way of looking at things and have lived that out. And what we see now is the natural result of if you stick with the Washington plan.
Wow. So you think it's his fault?
Well, I don't like Washington. You know I don't like him for. I've never hidden this. I led with
that's
it.
That's true.
So, but there are no secrets here.
But do you think the Washington ideas permeated into Black Hopkinsville and stayed here?
Yeah.
Or did his message resonate with Hopkinsville because that was already the perspective that they had? It's not like that he came and his rock in the pond is what generated the ripple. No, the ripples were going, and his speech just kind of hit the top.
No, I don't think he started it. I think that it's more like it was something that was there. He came in. They're like, yeah, let's keep this going, and then they just and they stayed in that direction. Yeah, they kept moving. Like it was like an object in motion.
Stays in motion,
and
because the African American population here was already kind of lukewarm.
Yeah,
it wasn't too violent. It wasn't too this. It was kind of even kill. They had the numbers, but they didn't vote even during,
Yeah.
because we went through Reconstruction and we didn't see, an overwhelming amount of the black vote changing things.
No.
It stayed pretty much the same.
Well, I mean, and so when he's coming to town, you were talking about how white people listen to him.
Right.
121. Washington standing among white people was apparent from the outset. like you're saying. Judge Price, the son of a slaveholder, said, quote, "I don't know what he is going to talk about, but I am willing to endorse anything he says before he says it." That's a huge deal for a black man, 1909, going on a tour, trying to talk about improving the black race. I want to start a school. Give me your money.
Yeah.
And for white people in power, again, descendant of slave, to say, whatever he says, listen to him. I already know it's going to be good.
He was a safe black person
Yes.
in the eyes of white America.
And okay, so Richard, I'm going to make this personal about you and I for a second. Brandon,
I'll just sit here and watch.
Brandon, feel
You're
free
fine.
to
Go ahead.
feel free to chime in on what you think about this question, all this. But is that a fear that you have?
What's
Because to be seen as the safe black guy,
To be perceived.
to be perceived.
I think that's a kind, we talked about, I think it was in the last episode, about the wearing the mask.
Yeah.
It's like, can I be unapologetically black? Doesn't mean I'm not going to be who I am, but does it mean that I can release the full weight of frustration or the full weight of my thought, knowing that it could potentially hurt people's feelings or that people would see me in a different way? And so I think there's a couple things that balance that. The regenerated heart that I have makes me care about the concerns of others.
Yeah.
If you had known me before Christ, I would not care. I'd probably do it to see what you thought. But because also in the station in life as a pastor, I care about the people that are in front of me, regardless if they're black or white. I care about the words that I speak or the message that we have and how it's going to be considered or taken. And in public speaking, they say that's knowing your audience.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that my audience receives what I say more than they care about what I think about them or what I think about them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think to some degree, yes. I think some degree, I have to, because I don't want to act in my flesh.
Yeah.
Because I could just say what I want to in my flesh, and I could feel really, really good about what I just said.
Yeah.
But then I could completely miss the message and the ministry, which would be the people in front of me.
Yeah. I will say for me, it is a struggle that I deal with, of that fear of being essentially, like I said, pigeonholed as safe black guy. One, because of my biased view, how I feel about Washington, but also because I do see that there's this loss of utility in it. Because once you're, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, think Carlton.
Right.
Like
C1.
Right. Carlton, it was an amazing character. And there was so much complexity to him as an individual. There was. But at the end of the day, there were so many things that he could never do. And then his cousin comes along.
Right.
And he can just walk in the room and all of a sudden he can drive the conversation forward. He can bring about all kinds of necessary change, as it were, because he'll be heard.
Right.
Because he's not the safe guy.
That's right.
And so that's something that I do wrestle with myself, is like, how do I, like you said, how do I act within the Holy Spirit of being this new creation that actually cares about what people think,
Yeah.
who's not just being aggressive for the sake of causing controversy,
Yeah.
while at the same time not being pigeonholed as safe black guy.
Yeah.
So that now essentially if I say something that isn't safe, it's going completely unheard.
Yeah.
It's a balancing thing.
And I think there's a reality of, like, there are gospel issues that I could care less what you think. There are gospel issues that I don't care if it makes you cry. I'm going to say it because it needs to be said. Now, there are some non-gospel issues, some social issues that I care about that I pause before I speak, because I think the relevance of it doesn't matter and it doesn't hold as much weight as those gospel issues.
Yeah.
Like everything that goes on, especially as ministers of the gospel, everything we hear in the news, we have thoughts, we have feelings, we have preferences, we have, things that we want to say, but at the same time, it's not wise to comment on everything I feel.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But the gospel issues, the word of God, it matters.
Yeah. So to bring you in on this, Brandon, as a black, no, I'm joking, you're not a black guy.
You could be, hey, but what if you were? How about you be an honorary black man for like 5 minutes? And
I don't think it works that way.
it doesn't.
No,
I don't think so.
I was going to say instead.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it works that way.
I want to bring you into this to make it more relational in the sense of I think that there are very few things, like there are things that we experience as black men that we could say our experience is unique and how we walk through it, but it is not unique because it is a common human experience.
There you go.
And so I want to bring you into it and say, make it relational. While you may not have that issue of safe black guy, do you struggle with that as far as being safe pastor guy?
I do. I don't think it's the same level by any stretch of the imagination, but I think just, for example, my tenure here at Edgewood, when I was here before as an associate pastor, there was a sense in which I was very concerned with fitting in. And I like reading, and I like talking about ideas.
Yeah.
And not everybody likes reading, and not everybody likes talking about ideas.
Yeah.
And so I kind of squashed that and almost went, in an attempt to relate, to become safe book guy, like that was an attempt to try to fit in with what I perceived to be the culture. Not only did that hamper then my relationship with people because I was trying to be something I wasn't, I think that hampered the culture because there's people here who like reading and they like talking about ideas. And so for me to cram them all into this one category wasn't fair of me. And so I do think about that when it comes to this context is not only do we not want Kamar to be safe black guy Kamar for Kamar's sake, but for the church's sake. For too long, I think the church in America, by and large, and I'm painting with an overly broad brush here, for too long, our approach to multi-ethnic congregations, our approach to cultural diversity has been, we are okay with you being a different color, but we need you to fit,
assimilate
culturally.
Yeah.
And so it's okay if your skin is black, so long as your talk and your conduct is white.
Yeah.
Right.
And that doesn't help the church.
Yeah.
That doesn't express anything of the diversity that we see in the New Testament, that we see being the vision for what the church could be.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the point where it doesn't just hurt the individual who's trying to assimilate, who's trying to conform.
Yeah.
It ultimately hurts the culture or the church or the society where that assimilation is attempting, because you're missing out on the biggest benefit of diversity.
Yeah.
And what's wild is I think that might be scary to white people and exciting to people that are not white.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember which historian. There's a Christian historian who's writing nowadays, and he talks about that, about the insults, essentially, that racism has done on white America too. That it is a sword with two edges. And there are things, and I think that's what you're talking about. If we fill white churches with safe black pastors for the sake of diversity, it is hurting the white church. Because what they need is not safe pastors. What they need are authentic, real pastors, regardless of their skin color. And so that is the thing, though. That is true, that this relationship thing is actually hurting white America too. Because this is why sometimes where, say Richard has a bad day, and he goes and he walks in and he's no longer putting on the white voice. And he's not wearing the white friendly t-shirt. He's wearing the "I'm an angry black man today, leave me alone" shirt.
Right.
Wait, you have that shirt?
I probably do.
But and he walks in and he has that interaction, and then somebody's like so taken off guard. I know for me professionally, I dealt with that when I was working in foster care and I was running an office. I had a lot of staff individuals, and I'll be honest, they were mostly white women. And it just boggled my mind. I'm like, I'm married to a white lady. I know how to talk to white ladies. Granted, they're not Southern white ladies, but still,
aren't all white ladies the same?
But it took me forever to begin to start to realize that what I was dealing with was that my wife, she is okay with the idea of me being a man who has power, who has emotions and feelings, that sometimes I might speak in a direct and monotone way, and that does not mean I'm going to kill her. Rather, that means that I'm in a direct and monotone manner. She's used to that. And so I was already so accustomed to the idea that, I can just be me, that I did not know how to deal with that with my staff. So I had a lot of staffing issues where I had to learn, essentially, talking about the mask or being safe, I had to essentially learn how to talk to people who weren't ready for me to be authentically 100% black because they took that as threatening.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that they were I'm not trying to say these were horrible racist women who were out to get me. They just had no cultural context. They had no lens by which to say, when a black guy speaks this way, it's not threatening, it's not violent, it's not unsafe, he's being human. This is the downside of all of these safe images, is that it leaves white people ill-equipped to have authentic relationships with black people.
You know, one of the things you told me a couple of years ago was, and it took me a while to think about it because I didn't like it at the time, but it was one of the worst things to happen is for white people to have the one black friend.
Yeah.
To have the one black friend that they get along with, that's maybe achieved, educationally. He's, he or she is, maybe a higher economic level. And then because that one black friend then becomes the baseline for every other person in the community. Well, see, if so-and-so can do it, why do they have to be like that? Why can't they be like him? And then it begins to justify so many different stereotypes and so many prejudiced thoughts about the rest of society because of that one black friend. And in reality, everybody's an individual. And so you can't put everybody in one little box and expect everybody to act the same way. And I don't think that, by and large, well, maybe they do. African Americans probably do that to some degree to all white people, but by and large, everybody should be viewed as an individual.
Yeah.
And so I finally get that point.
Yeah, that was not mine.
A couple of years, but he's
again,
with you now.
I didn't invent it. I read it in the book, and it made me angry when I first read it. But then he presented the data, and I'm like,
It wasn't Wendell Berry.
To make it, no, it wasn't Wendell Berry. But to make it all the more relevant for us at the church level, I do think this is. So that same book, actually, one of our congregants is borrowing that book right now because they wanted to read more because of this. They said, "I want to read more." I'm like, "I wanted to learn more." I'm like, you know what? You can borrow these books. You can read these books. They really delve into it deeper. So I'm like, I don't agree with everything these books say. That book right there and the one we're talking about, that really messed me up, and I didn't like it because it's written by two white guys, and I'm like, what? But the data they present, because it's data. I'm like, they're not wrong. Yeah. And one of the other things they talked about is, this is a real thing, document, the division between black and white Christians in America, which is really sad. But if you don't know this, anybody who's listening or watching doesn't know this, studies have been done. Barna Group, which is really good on studying things, have done this as well. Atheistic studies, like, it doesn't matter who studies it. When you study the political and ideological breakdown of Christians in America and just people in America, the largest ideological divide that exists between groups in America is between white and black Christians. Mm-hmm. White atheists and black Christians are closer together than white and black Christians.
Wow.
I mean, black atheists and white Christians, like, literally, for some reason, being in Christ makes us more divided across the white-black line than anything else in this country. And I think part of it has to do exactly what we're talking about, is that because we have these places and they come in and they are that safe person putting on that mask, putting on that front, it leads to this false view of us and themselves. And it broadens the division instead of lessening it. Wow.
So could you say the difference between the two is black and white?
It's even bigger than that. I mean, I know that's funny, but the sad thing is that, like, when I first, I'm like, this is really, but I mean, you see elections.
It's really sad.
I mean, elections are a great example of that. When you see people campaigning, and I'm not saying what side I'm on things, because I know between the three of us, we're all over the map on everything except for the gospel and Christ and the importance of life.
Yeah. Yep.
But that's the thing you'll see. Like, they'll say the Christian vote is this way, and it's like, no, the Christian white vote is this way.
Right.
And what are you saying to all the black and brown and Asian Christians? You're literally calling them non-Christian right now to their face because they don't vote the way you do.
So to see black Christians and white Christians to come together, it really is a hand of God.
Yeah. You got to get that. We should all listen in on this. No, I'm joking.
Hey, girl. Sorry about that.
No, but so back to Washington, because I do want to continue to make him look like a horrible person.
Wait. Before we get there, before we make him look like a horrible person, I felt like on page 1, where is it? 122. First full paragraph there.
I do have another one there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think that is the statement that I would say, okay, this is not a considered opinion, but I appreciated Glazier stating Washington's goals and the goals of those who were with Du Bois, however you want to say it.
You're from Idaho, so you can say Du Bois because
Yes, we don't.
Boise.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, and so I was actually, I find myself distracted quite frequently in these podcasts. And one of those that was distracting me was, okay, hey, his name means of the trees. WEB, of the trees. Interesting.
Another reason I must
That's
love
how
him.
Boise. That's how Boise got its name.
See, another reason I love him, 'cause I love trees.
Anyways, but yeah, so this statement that they were looking for the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted the same thing. It was not a disagreement of end. Washington
Mm-hmm.
would have never said this segregation that is taking place right now ought to be this way. What was your quote? Segregation now.
Then, now, and forever.
Yeah, no, that's not his point. But he just disagreed on the methodology of how to get there.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I feel like I need to defend him from you, but I don't know why.
I don't know why either, because, okay, same page. This is Glazier talking, who is biased, yes, because he's a human being, and we all
Right.
are. Such publicly expressed sentiments, optimistic to the point of fantasy, and devoid of any hint of recrimination or demand, guaranteed his support among white people.
Like Judge Price, who said, I don't know what he's going to say, but I'm all for it.
Yeah. And so, and that's kind of my view too, it's like, dude, man, you're fantasy world.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. I mean, you have the right ends in mind, but your means will never get there, dude.
And see, that's the thing where I look back in history, though. It's like, what he said, it made a lot of sense. If you just work hard, if you try hard, if you just give it enough time and just put your head down and put your hand on the plow, keep moving forward, just be a good citizen, eventually these white folks are going to come around and they're going to accept you, and we're going to have equality, and we're going to have everything that we want. We just have to take our time and just be good citizens. And that did not work.
And I think it's because he did not, for whatever reason, maybe he came from a really good plantation. I don't know. But I think his view of white Southerners, white people in general in America, but especially white Southerners, was just plain wrong. Quote from when he was in Hoptown. My favorite, you know,
I know you're where you're
page
going.
125, top of page 125. This is when he was in Hoptown. He's sitting there and he's talking about how great Hopkinsville is, how happy he is to be here. And he says, we have here, in proportion to their number, probably the very highest type of Negroes to be found anywhere in the country. All right, that sounds great. Cool. You're complimenting the black folks. Yeah,
the
go
highest
Washington.
type.
Yeah, we're the highest kind. Then he goes on to say, this is very largely due to the fact that we also have the very highest type of white people.
He was a politician. He was playing.
You guys are
both
apologists for
sides.
him big time.
Yeah, he was a politician. I mean, he's reading his crowd, he's knowing his audience, and he's looking around. He says, "We got white and black people. Okay, we got the best black people. We got the best white. This is the best place on the planet." But here's the thing: is his thoughts. That's the thing. At the end of the day, they didn't work, because if you fast forward another 30, 40, 50 years, nothing changed, and actually things got worse.
Yeah. Well, I take issue with him calling them the highest type of white people, just because what we've learned so far about the white people of Hopkinsville. Like, I think that's an unfair thing to say about, like, you should be offended as a white person, Brandon, that he would say that these were the highest kinds of white people.
Are you saying that Brandon is the highest?
No, I'm not saying you are, but I'm just saying, like, I mean, like the 30% white DNA I have in me is offended by this. Like we can do better than that. Washington, how dare you set the bar so low for whiteness to think that this is the highest type of white people?
Miss Ellen might have still been alive. She could have been in that meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is very true. I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah.
Interesting. But no, I'm not trying to be an apologist for Washington, and I'm not saying his is the right approach. I'm just saying that this is one of those issues where I think we have to give grace to anybody who's advancing a solution.
Yeah.
Anybody who's attempting to bring change in, I think, has to be, okay, we're going to disagree on methodology, but I appreciate that you have the same goal that I do.
Yeah.
And I think that you see that in the relationship. If you read Washington, you read W.E.B. Du Bois.
Let's go with the boys. It's okay.
I'm gonna keep throwing different pronunciations.
Like
in there.
I'm gonna find the third way.
I am.
You can't say Du Bois. That's racist.
Yeah. Why you calling him the boy, huh?
Why you got to be a boy?
Why can't it be demand?
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a moment of silent prayer there. Lord help me. But yeah, I do think that you read Douglas, you read Washington, you read all of these different perspectives, but they all are saying the same thing. or wanting the same thing. They're just disagreeing about how to get there. And I think that in the church today, what we're going to find is nobody that I know of in the church who claims the name of Christ in a credible way is saying black people are inferior to white people. Nobody in the church is saying,
unless you go to
he qualified it. He said that he knows of.
Oh.
He said that he knows of, and he called them credible. So
Yes.
he's so narrowed the scope.
I did narrow the scope.
out of the 20 people. I'm just joking.
No, but I think that there's this desire, this recognition
Yeah,
for
that's
the
true.
equality of the races.
Right.
There's this recognition
agree.
in our world. We need this.
100%.
There's just disagreements on how to get there.
Yeah.
And so what I don't want people who are listening to this to take away is, if I disagree with these three guys about the right way to go about it, I'm the enemy.
Yeah.
No.
Not in the slightest.
No.
And so I would say the same thing for Washington. Like, okay, you're joking about he's my least favorite. You know that.
No, I'm not joking. He really is my least favorite black leader
No. But
Your least favorite?
of all the black leaders.
Even Marcus Garvey?
I liked him more. Yeah.
but you're not saying he's ill intentioned.
Like I said, I believe he's in heaven right now.
Yeah.
I believe he's a brother in Christ.
absolutely.
I
But he was
believe
wrong.
that he was sincere in his beliefs. He was not a hypocrite, which
He was sincere, but he was sincerely wrong.
yeah.
Do you think do you think he did harm?
Yes.
Okay, that's
I do.
because do you think his ways of going about things put us as black people back?
I don't think it put us back. I think it delayed.
It
I think
delayed
it slowed it. But again, I don't think any of it was intentional.
Right.
I think that I don't think he was a bad person. When I say my least favorite black, you got to realize too is that that's a very small collection of people, because by and large, a lot of people who could have been influential were killed off early in life.
Right.
I mean, there's plenty of people we're learning more about in different names now because of how history is progressing and whatnot. So we're learning about people like, wow, there was a guy who was in a small town, did this and this and this. Man, if that guy stayed alive another 5 years, it'd have been something. So it's a very limited pool, a very, very limited pool. But also it's because of my own personal bias of where I sit on how I feel about intellectual things and how I feel about work, how I feel about just society in general. There's many, many, many reasons why it is that I say no. And on top of all that, my allegiance, as it were, to the group that is the Bois and NAACP and all those other things, says, all right, well, I mean, you can't be for both. They may have had the same ends,
Yeah,
but it really is a one or the other.
You're going to land on this methodology or this methodology. And that's, I guess, bringing it to today again, just so we don't miss that, is when we have people who are saying to us, why are you talking about this? Why, or would say to me, Brandon, why are you sitting as a white guy having this conversation? If we would just quit talking about it, this problem would go away. And I would say, I disagree with you methodologically.
Right.
But I can agree with you that we are still seeking the same goal.
we want the problem to go
Because
away.
that's a question I have, is that same methodology that Booker T. Washington had, that same philosophy of how to handle the situations in our country is still alive today.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what you said, why are we still talking about today? Why can't people just put their heads down, work hard, and the problems go away? Well, that's the exact same mentality that Booker T. Washington had, and it didn't work. It took the methodology of W.E. Du Bois / Martin Luther King / civil rights and / what we're going to talk about next. It took lynchings.
Yeah.
It took really bad things to happen. And Frederick Douglass said this, without struggle, there can be no progress. And I think what Booker T. Washington was trying to do was have progress without struggle.
Yeah.
And that did not work.
If it wasn't, we had to get to the point where you had people like Malcolm X and Huey P. Newton who were standing there saying, all right, I'm an American citizen. I have a right to own guns.
Yeah.
It took that to begin to start having serious conversations. Because, I mean, Washington also had the right to sit there and say, and we're going to police our campus with armed black men. And he never did.
Right.
And there's a reason why he never did, because he knew, well, that could cause some controversy. Well, eventually we got to the point where people were saying, you know what? Well, if you're going to police your neighborhoods with people with guns, let's do it too.
Yeah.
If you're going to defend your church, we're going to defend our church too, especially since ours are being blown up.
And let's be honest, when violence happens, it gets people talking.
Yeah.
I mean, when we went through the different racial incidents of 2015, 2016, 2017, all of these unarmed black men and all these police, what we call brutality and things like that. It started protests. It started marches. I remember being in Clarksville and they had a protest on Wilma Rudolph Boulevard. It lit up social media. What is going on? When can we talk about this? Maybe we all need to come together. But it wasn't on Exit 11.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, people were afraid that it was going to spread.
Yeah.
They were afraid that it was going to come in their neighborhood. So now let's talk. Let's discuss. Let's open up the airwaves. Let's sit down. Why can't church leaders come together? And when things are not good, let's talk civilized.
Yeah.
But when there's no problem going, why are we talking about it?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, minorities, we have a long memory. And I think that's one of the issues that a lot of people deal with is that you have issues that never got resolved, rarely get talked about. And so when they continue to come up, people say, why is this an issue? And it doesn't become an issue until bad things happen.
I was thinking how you said they have a long memory. It's easy to have a long memory when you're being constantly re-traumatized. And I think that's a large part of it. One interesting point, I think it was mentioned in here, when Washington came to town was right around this time. Was it right? No, I'm thinking about a different person. Yeah, it's the next part, Poston Brothers. Yeah, sorry, Poston Brothers. I'm doing Poston Brothers thing. But I did want to talk about what's coming up next week because I hadn't realized that until I was rereading this chapter. August 8th.
Yeah. So
is when they celebrate Emancipation
which
Day
is so weird.
in this part of Kentucky. Like, yeah,
we've got a lot of days, right?
Yeah.
So we've got June 19th, right, which is Juneteenth,
which is a Texas thing.
It's a Texas thing, but it's the one that got National Federal Holiday.
And then we've got 4th of July, which is Independence Day. And then we've got August the 8th, which is, in a sense, the Freedom Day for Western Kentucky.
Yeah, so Kentucky especially.
And so do we celebrate all three?
I don't know what I'm doing about August 8th this year. I mean, I got work that day. We got staff meeting.
So
should we do a special prayer during staff meeting?
So we actually took the step of saying, hey, there's a list of holidays that the church observes. It's in our personnel handbook, et cetera, et cetera. And the personnel committee said we're adding Juneteenth.
Awesome.
Maybe we need to talk about adding August 8th.
Well, Juneteenth is a national holiday.
Yeah,
so
right.
You can't go backwards on that one. But August the 8th, that's, a lot of people, I didn't know that until I moved to Kentucky. Never heard of it until the last 2 years.
I didn't know about it until last year when we scheduled a church fellowship for August 8th. And somebody said, well, we may not be able to get the park that we were trying to rent out because I think they do a big emancipation thing that day. I was like, why that day? And here it is.
Yeah,
I'm learning more again.
Yeah. And also it's the day where Andrew Johnson released his slaves, which, I don't like Andrew Johnson. He was a Tennessee governor.
He makes your list?
He was a bad president, too.
Well, not a fan.
Not a fan of
Well, so the August 8th thing, like I said, I guess that can be a short bridge to the Poston Brothers. Because that's a family that's very important in the history of this town. We talk about, Washington came here, important black leader, national level. Poston Brothers, you got the one, was it Ted? Who's nationally known. He's the godfather of black journalists, I think we would call him.
Yeah. That's what it says downtown.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. But his brothers are the ones who influenced him. And so they're talking about how they started a newspaper. Was it
what page are you?
141. The Hopkinsville Contender.
So there's no copies of it there.
Yeah, that's a whole other frustration of mine. Like,
how's that possible?
nobody saved nothing?
Did they not save nothing, or did nothing get burnt?
Like, what? I don't know. It's just
Or D.
I mean, that's
All of
just,
the above.
Anyway, so we're gonna towards the end of that middle paragraph there in 141. It says the Poston Brothers' protest against discrimination sprang from an intense race consciousness and a determination to act on it. They sought the kind of black empowerment that not only provoked white opposition, but also, in all probability, frightened numbers of black people in Hopkinsville. Giving up on a facade of racial amity for the sake of accommodation to social inequality, the Postons assuredly did not wear the mask. And then I wrote my little margin. Sounds like my kind of people.
They were not making friends and influencing people.
But so here's contemporaries to Washington that are essentially like a critique against his view. They said, no, the solution is we're going to make a newspaper and we're going to boldly print our opinions about what we should do. Their newspaper was talking about how it stopped being printed because they were protesting a World War I veteran parade. Because in the parade, they said black soldiers march in the back. And they're like, no, that ain't right. And their newspaper got shut down for that. Where no longer would people print their newspaper in town. They go on to inspire their brother, who national acclaim and all that. But I think it's an interesting thing. Like, they stood up. And as he says, which is true, it didn't just scare white people. Like, the black people of Hoptown probably like, you guys need to sit down and be quiet. You're going to get us all killed. Like, and what is this, 1919? You got a book that you talk about us reading.
Exactly.
That's an important year, 1919.
That was the Red Summer.
There's a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not a small thing for them to say, yeah, we know they might lynch us, but who cares?
Because that was really happening. I mean, I think it was the year 1919, you had 20 plus 25, almost 30 racial incidents or racial riots. Even in, actually on the other side of the state, you had Corbin, Kentucky. And in Corbin, Kentucky, around, I think it was the same year, 1919, there were an encampment of African Americans that were just outside the city of Corbin. They were there to work on the railroads and different things. Well, there was a couple of guys who went in town. They got in a little, not even a brouhaha, but they got into an argument with a couple of the white guys. Well, the drunk white guys went and got a whole bunch of other white folks, and they gathered up all of the African Americans, about 300. They gathered up the men, women, and children, put them on a train going south, and sent them to Knoxville. And that was Corbin, Kentucky. That was also a little known fact about them is that's where KFC got started.
Yeah.
Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yeah, that's where
Corbin, Kentucky.
That's where KFC's from.
But the first KFC location was open in Salt Lake City, Utah.
It probably was, but he first started making the chicken in a diner.
In Corbin.
Yeah,
Or a
Corbin
gas
is
station.
Corbin's the home of KFC.
Interesting. They have a sign that says,
Proud moments in history.
Yes.
and race ride.
Right. Yeah, that's right. KFC and race ride.
There you go.
Yeah, just that slogan's not going to work, man.
Probably not.
It doesn't ring.
They still have a problem understanding why there's not many African Americans that live there.
I just don't understand.
Probably get a good deal on the house.
But all right,
I want to start a church in Corbin. Multi.
how does your wife feel about that?
Multi-ethnic churches.
We went through that. Easy.
I've yet to go through that.
We went through quick.
I've been well. On that part, I want to just to bring it back full circle before we close out this episode, as it were. The end of the chapter, we're talking about this newer bondage and deeper shame.
Mm-hmm.
I've shared my opinion on why I think that Washington's views helped to solidify that. But what do you guys think? Do you think that? I mean, I can get saying, well, we're scared. Like we talked about one of the other episodes, like realizing hundreds of years of slavery and essentially indoctrination on this way of looking. But at the same time, there are people who view things differently too. Like, did that hurt more than it helped?
When you say did that hurt?
Did Washington's pacifist, I'm just gonna what did he say? He said something like to acquiesce. Like did that hurt more than it helped? And I'm gonna say, like, let's look at it this way. Pretend that Reconstruction era, Jim Crow is on the rise, and black people across the nation say, nah, we're not putting up with this.
Mm-hmm.
Period. This is no discussion. You treat us as equal, or I guess we're having Civil War in Part 2. Would that have been better, knowing now what we know now? Would that maybe have resulted in a more unified nation than the long, slow process of, well, let's just ride this out and maybe we'll eventually get better?
You want to go first, Brandon?
I know it's not fair to do that to history. I know it's not fair, but I'm saying, take aside the fairness. What do you think?
Has war ever accomplished peace? I would argue no. I would argue no, based on the New Testament. And I don't think that is the way to transformation and change. I think that Washington had a vision for how this could happen. Others had another vision for how it could happen. but both of them were hampered. I don't think you can lay the blame at either methodology's feet. Both of them were hampered by the fact that there were those in society who had a plan for a different direction. And so it's not like it was like, hey, here's one path forward, everybody agrees, we try this one, or here's another path forward, everybody agrees, we try this one. It was, hey, here's a black guy with an idea for how to move forward. Here's a black guy with an idea for how to move forward. And here's some white people in power who aren't going to let either one of these happen.
And
is that fair to say? I don't know.
I kind of disagree. I mean, when you look at, okay, so Civil War is over in 1865. Okay, then immediately Reconstruction phase starts to go into effect. Even though in Kentucky it meant a little something different than it did in the lower southern states, but you see something that had never happened before. You see momentum. You see the vote beginning to give African Americans power. You see African Americans in Congress all throughout the state and in Washington, D.C. And we're on the tail. We're talking about 1909. This is right before World War I. But what you're seeing is some inertia, some energy in this reality that African Americans can be equals. And so when Booker T proposed his ideas, it was slowing down that momentum. And really what it did was when World War I was over, right around 1918, 1919, we see an emboldened African-American population that now has been taught that they can be equals in the battlefield. They know how to use guns. They were treated as equals on other nations, and they know what equality feels like being in France, being in different places. And they come back and they see that they're 30, 40, 50 years behind where they were. Yeah. And they realize that we have been treated wrong, and we know what it feels like to be treated right. And I think if we stayed on that same trajectory after the Civil War, going into Reconstruction, and if the methodology of W.E. Du Bois was implanted in place, there would have been some struggle. But I think what it would have done is the struggle that was eventually fought in the 60s, it would have happened faster, and it probably wouldn't have lasted as long. And we would be we as African Americans would have been further along where we are today versus where we would be if we did things the way we did things.
I will say this, and then we'll end off this episode. I'd say that we definitely agree that if only the church had been the church. Because I hear what you're saying about violence, wars never solve the problems. I'm obviously biased and agreeing with what you're saying, because anytime the law is considered the answer, I agree with it. But I do think that at the same time, we can all three agree that, but if the church had stood up, because both of these guys are leading, both these guys claim Christ as their Lord and Savior. Both these guys, I think, are in heaven based off of what I understand about them. But they were both also still trying to lead as Christian men from a worldly way, and not from a purely biblical way.
Right.
And had we had church leaders stand up, and the church lead
on both sides,
that would have been truly something.
On both sides.
Yes. Well, we're going to end it there. I have no idea what the audio's going to look like, because I just now realized that did that stop recording thing on me again?
Interesting.
So we'll find out what the audio sounds like on this one. We might have to play the entire episode. Who knows? We'll find out.
I said a ton of brilliant things.
I'm saying bye to that thing then. And end it. That's the cut.
I love it.